Ever get that feeling like there's this invisible pressure pushing you to think or act a certain way? Even if something inside you is like, I don't know about that.
Oh, absolutely. That tension between fitting in and thinking for yourself is a universal struggle.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're going deep into this idea of belief, how social pressure shapes what we think, and what it takes to truly think independently.
It's a fascinating area.
It really is. And you know what? Our source material this time, it's almost like a parable, a story about these messengers, right?
Yeah.
They show up in this town with a message that totally rocks the boat, challenges everything the townspeople thought they knew,
Talk about shaking things up.
and the reaction they get. Let's just say it's not exactly a warm welcome. Think accusations, threats, the whole shebang.
People don't always handle challenges to their worldview very well.
But hold on, here's where it gets interesting. Because in the middle of all this chaos, there's this one guy, lives on the outskirts of town, and he has a totally different reaction.
That's where things get really interesting, that divergence of thought. Why him? Why different?
Exactly. I mean, this story might be old, ancient even, but the stuff it's talking about, totally relevant to our lives, even today.
Absolutely. This story gives us this amazing lens to look at how we react when someone presents us with a new idea, especially one that challenges what we already believe. And it makes you think about how hard it is to think for yourself, especially when everyone around you seems to be on a different page.
It's like, are we really that different from those townspeople? Something to think about.
Right.
Right. But okay, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind back to the beginning. The way this source material describes the messengers arriving and the immediate pushback they get, it's vivid.
Oh, yeah. You really get a sense of the town's atmosphere.
And it's almost like they've already made up their minds before even hearing these guys out.
That's a great point. You see it in the source material. They're calling these messengers liars, straight off the bat, even threatening violence. That's not just healthy skepticism, right?
Right.
It speaks to something deeper. I think it shows just how powerful those pre-existing beliefs can be. And the pressure to just go along with what everyone else thinks, it's huge, even when it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's like they're so afraid to stand out, to be the one person who disagrees, that they don't even stop to consider what these messengers are actually saying.
It's a common reaction, though.
It is.
They'd rather stick with what's familiar, even if those beliefs are kind of shaky, than actually listen to something new.
Oh, totally. And, that urge to fit in, to go along with the crowd, we've all been there, right?
All the time.
Think about a time when you weren't so sure about something. Maybe you even had your own doubts. But everyone else was so gung-ho, and you just kind of went along with it.
Happens all the time. We're social creatures,
Yeah.
right? We want to belong, to be part of the group. And sometimes that means silencing that little voice inside that's saying, wait a minute, are we sure about this?
Totally. That fear of making waves, of disagreeing, it's powerful stuff. But that's what makes this next part of the story so interesting. So you've got the townspeople, right? Total fear and anger. But then there's this other guy living on the edge of town, and he's listening, and he's thinking differently.
He's our outlier.
He is. The source material describes this man who, instead of freaking out like everyone else, he actually hears these messengers out. He seems to actually be thinking critically about what they're saying.
What's the source material say about his thinking?
Well, it points out a couple of things. First, it says he noticed the messengers weren't asking for anything. No payment, no special favors, nothing.
Interesting. So he's picking up on their sincerity.
Yeah, like he's looking for clues, right?
Yeah.
And then there's this line where it says he found them to be, and I'm quoting here, rightly guided.
Okay, so he's not just blindly accepting what they're saying. He's evaluating their character, their integrity as part of the package. It's not just about the message, it's about the messengers themselves.
It's like he's looking beyond the surface, trying to figure out if these guys are for real. Like he's got this inner BS detector going off.
Absolutely. He's not just accepting things at face value. He's thinking for himself. And that takes us to that powerful question he asks.
Which the source material quotes him as saying directly, "Why should I not worship him who has brought me into being?"
Wow. Talk about a loaded question. He's not just passively accepting what everyone else believes. He's wrestling with it.
Yeah.
He's questioning, pondering. It's a deeply personal exploration of faith.
Right. And that, to me, that's independent thinking in action. He's choosing to figure things out for himself, even if it means potentially disagreeing with the entire town.
It takes guts, that's for sure. Because, let's be real, going against what your community believes, especially when those beliefs are so deeply ingrained, that's not easy. There can be real consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Social pressure is real.
Yeah.
But that's what makes this man's story so fascinating. He's not just blindly following. He's on this quest for truth. for understanding, and something I think we can all relate to on some level.
He's definitely relatable, but the question is, why? What makes him different? Why is this one man living on the outskirts of town, both physically and maybe metaphorically, able to approach these messengers and their message with an open mind when everyone else is so resistant?
It's the million-dollar question, right? Was it being physically distant from the center of town, the heart of all that social pressure? Or was it something more? Some difference in his personality, his life experiences, his values. Unfortunately, this source material doesn't really give us a clear answer.
It doesn't, but it does something else that's perhaps even more important.
What's that?
It gets us thinking. It gives us this amazing starting point for exploring the nuances of how we form our beliefs, like who and what influences us. And ultimately, what does it take to break free from that pull of the crowd and really, truly think for ourselves?
It's like he's got this inner compass, guiding him through all the noise and confusion. But here's the thing. His story isn't just about one guy's courage to think differently. It also shows us what can happen when we make those choices, for better or for worse.
That's a really important point. Because the source material goes on to tell us that the townspeople, the ones so stuck in their ways, they end up rejecting the messengers and everything they had to say.
Yeah, and the story doesn't spell it out exactly, but you get this sense that their refusal to even consider a new perspective, it doesn't end well for them.
It's like this cautionary tale almost. Like by clinging so tightly to their old beliefs, they ended up missing out on something important, maybe even causing their own downfall. And the thing is, we see that same dynamic play out all the time in the real world, don't we?
All the time. But then you have the man from the outskirts, the one who listened, who considered something new. His story has a different ending.
Right. And this is where the source material gets really interesting because it tells us he finds forgiveness and is even elevated, given a place of honor, all because he was open to a new way of thinking.
There's a real sense of hope in that, isn't there? Like, his willingness to challenge what he thought he knew led him to a better place.
Absolutely. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes being willing to change your mind, to see things from a new angle, that can lead to really positive things.
It really can. But it makes you think, right? Would you have been like those townspeople, caught up in the fear and skepticism? Or would you have had the courage to actually listen, to think for yourself, even if it meant going against the grain?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's something we all face in different ways throughout our lives. It's so easy to just go along with the crowd, to stick with what's familiar, even when it's not really working for us.
It's comfortable, right? Familiar.
Exactly. But if we want to grow, to truly understand ourselves and the world around us, sometimes we have to get a little uncomfortable. We have to be willing to question our beliefs, even the ones that feel fundamental to who we are.
It makes me think of that quote by Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. This story really brings that idea to life. It's not about blindly accepting what we're told. It's about asking questions, digging deeper, figuring things out for ourselves.
And that's especially important these days, don't you think? I mean, think about how much information we're bombarded with every single day. News, opinions, everyone telling us what to think.
Oh, it's overwhelming, really.
Yeah.
It's like drinking from a fire hose. Social media, news feeds, it never stops.
Exactly. And that's why this story, this whole idea of independent thought is so important. Because it reminds us that we have a choice in all of this. We don't have to just passively consume whatever's thrown at us. We have the power to choose what we believe, who we trust, and how we're going to show up in the world.
It's about taking control.
Right.
Right. Not letting ourselves be controlled by the information overload.
Precisely. It's about being mindful, being discerning, questioning our own biases, being honest about the ways we might be filtering information to fit our own narratives.
It's like we all have these filters in our minds, right? And sometimes those filters need a good cleaning.
Exactly. We need to be aware of those filters, how they're shaping what we see and hear and believe. And, sometimes that means being willing to admit we don't have it all figured out.
Oh, admitting you might be wrong. That's a tough one.
It is. But it's also incredibly freeing. Because when we let go of the need to be right all the time, it opens us up to a whole new world of learning and growth.
And connection, too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
When we can acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, it creates space for genuine dialogue, for understanding perspectives that are different from our own.
Yeah.
It's true. It's like, how often do we actually seek out conversations with people who disagree with us?
Right. It's so easy to just stay in our own echo chambers, surrounded by people who think and believe the same things.
Totally. But if we really want to grow, if we want to challenge our own biases and assumptions, don't we kind of have to step outside of that comfort zone?
Absolutely. And one of the most powerful tools we have for doing that, asking good questions.
Oh, there's nothing like a well-placed question to really get the gears turning. But it seems like these days we're so quick to jump to conclusions, to scroll through our feeds looking for something that confirms what we already believe.
It's true. It's like we've forgotten how to be curious, how to approach things with a sense of wonder and a willingness to be surprised.
We have. And we've forgotten how to ask those questions that might actually lead us to change our minds.
Exactly. It's like we're so afraid of being wrong, of admitting we don't know everything, that we miss out on the opportunity to actually learn and grow.
It takes courage to admit you don't have all the answers. Which, let's be real, how often do you hear people say that these days?
It's rare, isn't it? But it's such an important part of being human. We're all learning and growing, constantly evolving.
Uh,
And part of that process is being open to the possibility that we might be wrong, that there might be another way of seeing things.
it's like that saying, the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Exactly. And that's exciting, isn't it? That sense of possibility.
It is exciting. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into belief, social influence, and the courage to think for yourself, let's leave our listeners with this.
I'm all ears.
What beliefs have you been clinging to, maybe without even realizing it, that might be holding you back from seeing the world more clearly? And what can you do starting today to cultivate more independent thought in your own life?
Great questions to ponder. It could be as simple as branching out in terms of your news sources, having that difficult conversation with someone you disagree with. Maybe just taking some time for quiet reflection to really examine your own thought patterns, the things you've always assumed to be true.
Because at the end of the day, becoming a more independent thinker, it's not about having all the right answers. It's about asking the tough questions, listening with an open mind, and being open to the possibility that you might just learn something new along the way.
And that's a journey worth taking.
It really is.